Fantasy world building has been plagued by a lack of diversity in forms of government. Monarchies with their kings and queens have dominated the genre. However, there are many ways to add variety and depth to your world building, even if your realms are predominantly monarchies. This very secret information I provide in this video can add some much needed spice to your setting. Especially since for many stories and settings out there, the classic monarchy aren't necessarily the best suited type of government to bring to the story, or to bring the general vibe of your culture across. There are 3 questions you'll have to answer when thinking about all governments, as they make or break your form of government, including monarchies. Said questions are: what group of people controls most of the power and wealth in your realm? What are the ways said group of people keep their loyalists happy? And how do they deal with their opposition? Each question encompasses an important detail of any ruling system or system of governance, and depending on the answers to those questions, the system of governance might change. In monarchies, the people who control most power and wealth are the king and the lords of the realm. They own the land, which is the source of all wealth in feudal times, and they control the people living on the land, which they need to recruit into their levy armies. In a more constitutional monarchy, this power dynamic might change. And so it does in a republic. Republics are actually very special cases. While today a republic is associated with liberal democracy, this wasn't the case for most of history. In Rome, the original republic, most power lay in the hands of the semi-noble patrician class, which filled most ranks of the Senate. Power struggles led to more political say by the plebeians through people's assemblies and tribunes of the plebs, who had the right to veto acts of governance. While being far away from being democratic, the republic was seen as a form of government where the public people had the say and form the basis of government, compared to the monarchy of Rome that came before. In a theocracy, it's primarily religious figures who have the say, and in a magocracy, it's of course mages and wizards. But don't forget that the people with the most power and wealth don't need to be part of the actual government themselves. They might just control it through other means. Especially if they want to feign the idea that they are just a normal part of the system, like anyone else. But everyone in government needs to keep a supporter base that actually want to keep them around. Mutual benefit and all. The type of government doesn't matter. A monarch needs to keep the nobility happy and loyal, or he'll face rebellions and possibly be ousted. A dictator needs to keep his generals and general staff happy, or he'll face a coup. The current ruling party of your country needs to keep their voters happy, or at least uncaring enough, so they vote for the current party again in the next election. The way the government's supporters are kept happy and the lengths they have to go to so they can keep their loyalty adds another layer of complexity to what type of government your setting benefits the most from. The way a government deals with its opposition can make or break its success. There are generally 2 types of opposition: controlled opposition, also known as tolerated opposition, and suppressed opposition, which exists in all systems of government. In a monarchy, controlled opposition may arguably be the rarest yet most common form. This is because every loyal noble can act as a form of controlled opposition to the monarch's power. In a liberal democratic republic, the political parties not in government are considered the controlled opposition. However, oppression can occur just as easily. In monarchies, rebellious nobles, peasants, or anyone else who acts against the monarch's interest can be suppressed. People can simply disappear, as in other authoritarian government. Suppressed opposition generally opposes the status quo of the power dynamics as a whole, while the controlled or tolerated opposition is a part of the status quo, but may have different views views on policy. As third time's the charm, I'll take the Holy Roman Empire, our favorite medieval amalgamation, as an example again. But before that, I'll ask you to leave a like, subscribe, and maybe even leave a comment on your views on how you think of different governments befitting your setting. The Holy Roman Empire was an electoral monarchy that emerged from old Germanic traditions and a lack of centralized royal power, in contrast to Eastern Francia, which eventually became France, where the kings were able to keep more hereditary traditions. Initially, all dukes of the Holy Roman Empire were also electors, but over time, the circle of electors became smaller, until the 7 elector counts were established by the Golden Bull of 1356. The emperor's ability to maintain power relied heavily on the favor of these elector counts. Their vote was crucial, and even the Habsburg monarchy, with its long-running success, had to keep them content to retain the role as emperor. Therefore, the 7 elector counts held significant power, and the emperor had to ensure their satisfaction, or at least a majority of them, in order to maintain his position. The elector count, more so than any other of the princes in the Holy Roman Empire, counted both as loyals and as controlled opposition, while rebels, like I said, acted as the opposition outside the system. Part of them were the Italian republics. The Italian republics were far from being democratic. Their government deliberately split themselves off from the mostly German nobles who owned the lands surrounding the cities over time. They either bought or conquered those lands to own in the name of their own principalities and city-states, and became more and more independent until they were just a part of the empire in name. The Italian republics had their own system of government. Venice is probably the most infamous and complicated one in theory, but in practice it's still very clear. The Venetian merchants controlled the vast majority of wealth and power within the city. They might have had one of the most bizarre and complex constitutions out there, but it strictly kept the city's power within the interests of the entire merchant class, even if several factions split off over the times as controlled opposition, of course. And again, rebellions, protests, and other forms of uncontrolled opposition weren't out of the ordinary either, especially once they conquered other lands. So let's work together to create a form of government. The Confederacy of the Brothers and Sisters of the Dragon-Tooth Mountain, or simply the Confederacy, is a union of several estates and cities that gained their independence from their lords several centuries ago. During their wars of independence, they gathered their forces at the foot of the Dragon-Tooth Mountain, the highest mountain on the entire continent. The Confederacy was relatively loose, with each estate holding assemblies where they voted on matters at hand. There was a central government represented by all the different estates, but its say was mostly held on matters regarding foreign policy, warfare, and how to better connect the different estates of the realm. The peasants and merchants held wealth and power in the land, and efforts were made to ensure even the simplest of farm laborers had a voice when necessary, but this ideal was dependent on the laborer's employer. The Confederacy faced mostly internal opposition, with different factions arising over the years, split mostly by the vast mountains. But the realm was kept relatively civil. However, with their independence from the kingdoms of the realm, they lost the protection of the golden dragons that said kingdoms were in line with. The more vile and evil dragons in the mountain range only waited for this opportunity, and the Confederacy had to defend itself against whole swarms of dragons. As a result, the Confederacy became increasingly militarized, with everyone having to fight. Once they became aware that they had slain a local menace, they either helped the estates or used their newfound prowess as mercenaries to aid the wars of other realms on the continent. One day, the Confederacy was nearly overwhelmed, and chaos reigned until a savior appeared on on the horizon. Tillman Schwarzkreuz. Technically, he deliberately butchered the Confederacy's defensive capabilities with a few tricks, so that he could appear as the savior, but let's ignore that fact for now. Tillman and his band slew most of the dragons that attacked the Confederacy that day, reinstated order in the Confederacy, and now acts as its Lord Protector. Opposition to the Great Dragon Slayer isn't welcome, and anyone who openly condemns Tillman is portrayed as a Dracophile, likely in line with them, and preparing their return. Tillman and his followers control all the estates, replacing the people's assemblies with their own governors, who in theory only oversee those assemblies, but they barely ever call for these assemblies anymore. During the wars, Tillman aligned himself with the wealthiest merchants in the Confederacy, allowing him to control most of the country's resources himself or through his friends and beneficiaries. In turn, they are the only ones he needs to keep loyal, with healthy tax cuts and privileges. But for now, Tillman's charisma keeps even those who don't benefit from him directly in line. All in all, the Confederacy has regressed from a democratic peasant and merchant republic into a dictatorship in just a few years. And with Tillman's rise to power, the answers to my questions I posed changed. That's it for today's video, world builders. I hoped you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe and leave a comment on the systems of governance in your setting. See you next time.